Hello all and welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida and another Take 5 for Florida history. Today is another one of my animal stories, one about the flamingo. It's such an immense part of Florida's tourism history, and it's one of the most iconic symbols, albeit an unofficial one. But is it a native, or like so many Floridians, is it a transplant? A remarkable number of Florida's theme parks and attractions have flamingos. Beginning in the 1930s, Hialeah Park Horse Race Track near Miami was famous for their flamingo flock, or if you prefer, a flamboyance. Parrot Jungle was nearly as famous for its flamboyance of flamingos as it was for its cockatoos, macaws, and parrots. Additionally, many attractions that didn't have animals in general had flamingos, such as Sarasota Jungle Gardens, Sunken Gardens in St. Petersburg, Bok Tower Gardens, and McKee Jungle Gardens in Vero Beach. So what's this question all about? For there are hundreds of bird species that are native to Florida. For instance, one of my favorites is the Florida scrub jay, a very friendly bird that's not only native to the state, but is native nowhere else. There's also the crested caracara, a raptor and scavenger that is native to southern Florida and then Texas, Mexico, and on south to South America. Then there's the cattle egret, again one of my favorite species. They're an African species that appears to have flown across the Atlantic Ocean to South America in the 19th century and made its way to the Caribbean and Florida in the middle of the 20th century. Since they found their home in Florida without any human assistance, they're native. So what do we know about flamingos? Well, the species of bird I'm covering is the American flamingo, also commonly called the Caribbean flamingo, Phoenicopterus ruber. Apart from the question of Florida, it's native to many of the Caribbean islands, the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, and coastal Colombia and Venezuela. Considering it's native to both Cuba and the Bahamas, Florida's closest island neighbors, it seems like Florida would be part of its traditional habitat. Certainly, South Florida, including the Keys and the Everglades, are warm enough for them. In fact, studies at several attractions have shown they can weather the cooler temperatures even in Central Florida. They are native to nearby islands and can easily fly to Florida. Florida both has the climate and appropriate habitats for them, so why do ornithologists and historians even ask the question of whether they're native or not? It's actually pretty simple. For much of the 20th century, there have been hundreds of flamingos in captive populations, and especially early on, many of those birds were allowed to come and go. So it's well known that at least some of the birds seen in the wild were thought of as escapees. Next, let's look at Florida's history and the activities of bird hunters and bird watchers. In the 19th century, there were reports of flamingos in southern Florida, but these could have been day visitors rather than locals, and the data seemed to be anecdotal. Then, just after Miami was having its initial population boom, just before the Great Depression, Hialeah Racetrack introduced its flock. It was common to see them flying around the area, presumably even to the southern tip of the peninsula, for feeding. Many people, including plenty of scientists, believe that the flamingos seen in the wild were from Hialeah and other attractions, and had just established themselves elsewhere. Looking at museum collections, there are several flamingo eggs that were collected in Florida, well before the escapees muddied the water. This implies that at least some flamingos were breeding, though it might not have been enough evidence to consider the bird a native. Reported sightings of flamingos occur from the 1840s up until 1900. After that point, it appears that they disappeared from Florida. This was likely to be partly due to the hunting of numerous larger water birds for their feathers to adorn Victorian-era hats. While Florida's flamingos weren't killed in the same numbers as egrets, they certainly fell prey to the fashion of the time. So for about 30 years after 1900, there was little evidence that there was flamingos living in the area. As I said before, that changed when Hialeah Park opened in 1932. From that time to the present day, there continue to be flamingos in the region, and bird experts and the major bird identification books have been divided. Would the flamingos be here without human effort or not? If yes, are they here year-round or are they visiting? To add to the confusion, a few of the flamingos that have been captured live in the state have been banded by scientists, making them traceable. Some of those bands indicate that birds have come from as far away as Mexico. But then there was Conchi. Sometimes it takes a weird situation to resolve a basic question, especially one that hadn't been important enough to require an in-depth investigation. Conchi was that weird situation, and not surprisingly, it happened in the Keys. In 2018, Conchi was one of 3 flamingos that one day flew into the Naval Airfield on Boca Chica Key. Officially named Naval Air Station Key West, it has a focus on the safety of its pilots, airplanes, as well as local birds. This means that the larger birds are routinely scared away with fireworks and gunshots. While Conchi's companions took the less than subtle hints, Conchi didn't, and became a frustrating regular at the airfield. That's when Zoo Miami stepped in. As Stephen Whitfield, a conservation biologist with the zoo, related in a 2018 National Public Radio article, a Zoo Miami team captured and tagged Conchi, but they found out that the state of Florida considered flamingos a non-native species. This meant that the zoo wasn't going to be allowed to release him to track where he was from, as it is illegal to release potentially invasive animals. That was when the unanswered question became one that needed to be answered. Using the data of the Mexican birds found in the state was enough evidence to say that some flamingos were at least visitors, not escapees. At the time, Audubon, Florida, the not-for-profit that's dedicated to the conservation of birds and their habitats, was in the escapee camp, but they were willing to work on the project as well. The evidence from the 19th century, including the eggs in museums, proved to be rather influential. This even included notes from the 19th century naturalist John James Audubon, Audubon, Florida's namesake. The team's concentrated research resulted in plenty of newly discovered reports that flamingos were living and breeding in Florida in rather significant numbers. Score 1 for the historical research and institutions keeping track of bird sightings and egg collections, even if there's not an obvious use. Check out my video on shell collecting to hear from a Florida scientist about just how important such scientific collections can be. But back to Conchi. He was fitted with a satellite tracking device and released. No one knew where he'd head to, and instead of flying to Cuba or some other foreign shore, the home he returned to was Florida Bay, the body of water between the Keys and the Everglades. Turns out, Conchi was a Floridian, and since his release, he's been spotted multiple times, including with other flamingos in Florida Bay. So as of 2021, the question appears to be resolved. The conclusion is that the flamingos spotted on the southern tip of Florida are year-round natives and are living in areas where flamingos lived over a century ago. While it's not clear as to the lineage of the newer Floridians, some may be descendants of those 19th century birds, while some probably came from both nearby Caribbean islands as well as escapees from Florida attractions. It's also clear that Florida receives occasional flamingo visitors from Mexico, Cuba, and the Bahamas, and possibly other islands. To sum it up, the American flamingo is a Florida native, unless it's just visiting for a long weekend, or unless it escaped from one of the many attractions that continue to keep their flocks. Regardless, they live in Florida year-round. Additionally, they used to live in Florida year-round, so they're natives. When it comes to videos in which I cover animals, I typically provide a list of places where you're likely to see them, but the photos I've shared in the video have been taken at many of the different attractions throughout the state that currently have flamingos. Each photo was listed with the location, but here's the list for you again. By the way, Conchi was banded with the code FL01, as he was the first and so far only flamingo tagged in the state. Besides, being number 1 is fitting for a bird who lives so close to U.S. Route 1, the road that starts in Maine but ends in Key West. Thanks for watching another of Stingray Tom's videos. I appreciate your interest. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I cover all aspects of Florida's tourism history, including the important animals connected with our world-famous attractions, zoos, and aquariums. Stingray Tom's Florida, traveling through time around the Sunshine State.